Hey there, everybody. Sajah Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism and Natura Sophia Spagyrics, and welcome back to the plant path. In this video, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a continuation from a previous video I did back talking about the magic of the herbal neti pot and talking about sinusitis and topical treatment of the sinuses by putting herbs in the old neti pot and irrigating that way. But I went so long in that video talking about my story. If you haven't watched it, check it out. But it went so long, I didn't really have much time to get into my 5 remedies. So I'm gonna just do it in a separate video here. So here we are, as I can share with you my top 5 herbs to address rhinosinusitis or just sinusitis. For a little bit more information on that, I really encourage you to check out the magic of the neti pot and talking about sinusitis over there. It's also a little bit of an extension of my discussion of topical herbs, so be sure to check that one out as well, as we're redefining topical herbs. Well, not necessarily redefining it, but just clarifying that topical doesn't mean putting it on your skin. It means the herb touching the tissue. And that's what we're talking about with irrigating your sinuses with an herbal neti pot. So what herbs did I use when I was addressing my own sinus infection, which was progressively getting more and more painful every day? I thought I just had a cold and had a stuffy nose and thought it was just kind of an annoying thing. And my ND goes, I don't think so. You should probably think about treating that. So I did, and here's what I did. First herb that I mentioned in the other video briefly, but I want to get into it in a little bit more detail. That would be Goldenseal, Hydrastis canadensis. Of course, an herb of great fame. If an herb can be famous, Goldenseal definitely would be one of them. I remember when I was a kid hearing about Echinacea goldenseal, right? Everybody's always talking about that. Oh, it's this new herbal antibiotic, Echinacea goldenseal. Well, sure, Goldenseal has some antibacterial properties. Would I go so far as to calling it an antibiotic? Not so much. It's so much better than that. So Hydrastis, this is a classic North American herb. It's been used North American herbalism for a very, very long time. Of course, it was used by, everybody that lived here before the Europeans came to the Americas. And it's a fantastic remedy. This is, one of the herbs that contains probably one of our better studied herbal constituents of the modern era. It contains the alkaloid berberine, and berberine is present in a number of different medicinal plants, including herbs like Oregon graperoot, berberis, some Chinese remedies, coptis, philodendron. I have most experience with Oregon grape and Goldenseal, though. Berberine's being studied quite a bit these days. They're calling it whatever. They're calling it the herbal Ozempic. I think that's a load of garbage. I just don't call berberine that, please. And the herbs that contain berberine are not an herbal version of Ozempic. So if you're saying that, please stop saying that. It's just really not representing the herbs very well, and creating a false sense of what people might, a false expectation of a result people won't get using herbs. But anyways, we're talking about sinus infections here. Goldenseal, amazing herb. Bitter, bitter, bitter. The taste is bitter, a bit astringent, tonifying. We find that this herb, the actions that it has that make it really useful for a sinus infection is, on the one hand, it has this very antimicrobial property due to the presence of the alkaloids, of which berberine is one. Okay, there's many other alkaloids in berberine. I believe they're of the isoquinoline class. there's other ones. And this is one of the things where, people you can get isolated berberine alkaloid now and just, take it in supplement form. But lo and behold, it's very poorly absorbed. It's very quickly excreted. And it turns out that just taking a whole plant with berberine and all of the other alkaloids and all the other constituents is much better, because guess what? Nature put all those other chemicals into those plants with the berberine for a reason, affecting absorption, assimilation, and generally that principle that the term that David Winston used for it, which I really like, is biochemical synergy. And that's exactly correct. That's exactly what's going on here. Same thing is true with turmeric, right? Curcumin is in my opinion, I think pure curcumin isolate's useless. I wouldn't even bother. Whole plant turmeric, way better. Just more effective, better absorbed, better utilized, often cheaper, just overall better to use the whole plants. So in that way, Goldenseal has a nice antibacterial effect, antiviral effect, and antifungal effect. Now, the antiviral effect, off the top of my head, I can't quite recall what the research is. Typically, when we say antiviral, I think it's very important to specify what kind of virus any research, because usually if someone's going to say an herb is antiviral, that's usually based off of, ideally, some kind of research showing the herb actually kills, neutralizes, somehow disarms a virus. And usually that's in petri dishes, so it's usually in vitro research, which is not our preferred form of research for herbs, to be honest. But just because an herb does that to one virus doesn't mean it does it to all viruses, because all viruses are very diverse organisms. So this is why there's no such thing as a broad spectrum antiviral herb or a broad spectrum antiviral medication, for that matter, right? There is no such thing because viruses are incredibly diverse in their structure, in their genetic, even though they don't technically have their own DNA, but the way that they're formed, their underlying structure is highly different. Whereas bacteria, you can get a broad spectrum antibacterial, that's significantly more common. So, but Goldenseal is very useful for bacterial and fungal, which really, when we're thinking about, especially more subacute to chronic sinusitis symptoms or sinus infection, that's usually what we're wanting to treat. Usually bacterial or fungal, usually the very chronic sinusitis, there usually is a fungal component. So Goldenseal is very, very good here, but that's more the allopathic thinking, right? Kill the bug, kill the pathogen. Very simplistic way of thinking about it. From more of a vitalist perspective or a humoral perspective, we want to think, well, what was the environment of the tissues that enabled that pathogen to even really begin to thrive and flourish in the first place? And so typically when we're thinking about sinusitis, not in all cases, but many cases tend to be hot, inflamed, damp, and relaxed or atonic. The mucosa are leaky. That's why you get postnasal drip, runny nose, just a lot of mucus, swelling, pressure, pain in the face, things like that. So in that regard, Goldenseal is really great here because it matches on the ecological side too. This is a cold, bitter, draining of fluids, draining of heat, drying plant. So it matches energetically very nicely. And then also this herb, really the main thing this herb does, from my understanding of it, is that it is like really the mucous membrane tonic par excellence, right? This herb is for leaky, soggy, boggy, atonic, prone to infection mucosa, whether that be in the sinuses, whether that be in the digestive system, whether that be even to an extent in the urinary tract. Berberine is secreted, is to a degree excreted through the urine. We typically think more upper respiratory, gastric, GI, mucosa. Very, very good remedy there. Bitter tonic, mild astringent mucous membrane tonic. It's just going to really help. So when you wash that herb through the sinuses, it cools the inflammation and heat, gives a topical antimicrobial effect, and really helps to astringe, tonify, tighten up those tissues. Very key herb here. I've also used Goldenseal, not just in herbal neti pot, and this is something I mentioned in previous video on redefining topical herbs, but also in insufflators. So like for nose sprays, basically. Using like Goldenseal tincture in a bit of water with a little bit of glycerin in there, and you just do you can buy those nasal misters, you stick it up your nose and pump it and it sprays all up in there. That's a very nice way, pretty convenient way actually to do it too, because you just have your little bottle, whereas a neti pot is like, a little more involved, right? It's not something you can like easily do on the go. But those nasal insufflators are really handy to have if you have acute sinus infections. I mean, ideally, you should just be kind of home, not running around all over the place. But when I had mine, as I told in the previous post, I actually had to travel at that time, and there was zero way I could cancel. So I ended up having to travel, and I put together an insufflator, but I also was doing the neti pot about 3 times a day as well. So anyways, so Goldenseal, good herb. It's a bit of an expensive herb, right? So, if you can't do Goldenseal, you could get away with another berberine containing herb like Oregon grape or berberis. The one thing I would say is that Oregon grape and berberis, in my experience, they don't seem to have as strong of a mucous membrane tonifying effect that Goldenseal has. But nonetheless, they do have very similar antiseptic properties, and they're bitter. They'll work on the mucosa a little bit, obviously, especially if you're applying it topically, like through a neti. Those will work well as well. And that could be, you could use that as a decoction, right? You could decoct the roots. Usually use the roots of most of these herbs. You could decoct that, put the salt in, and just use that straight up, and that'd be really, really nice. Since I was traveling, I was using the tincture. Okay, next herb is Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. What can't we use Yarrow for? Well, this is a very versatile herb. It's a key herb I tend to think of anytime there's any sort of any infection, really. It's so good. Whether we're talking about something on the skin, something in the GI, something in the urinary tract, or something in the upper respiratory. I guess I don't really think of it so much for lower respiratory. I tend to think of it more upper respiratory, but very, very good herb here. Lots of good properties. It's bitter, it's aromatic. So that gives it a very nice affinity for the digestive system as a general remedy, because it's a carminative and bitter in one. But here in the sinuses, what we're really got, this herb does a lot of different things, but we'll just kind of focus on what we're using it for here in the sinuses. Again, like Goldenseal, it has an antibacterial as well as antiviral. It's not notably antifungal from the research that I'm aware of, but it certainly has some good antibacterial effect. Now, what's cool about this is that you're getting it through monoterpenes in Yarrow. So what I like about when I'm thinking about treating infection and I'm wanting to go about, doing some form of antibacterial approach, I really want to try to find herbs to compound together that might approach that antibacterialness from different classes of constituents. So like with Goldenseal, we've got it doing it through these alkaloids. For Yarrow, it's doing it through monoterpenes, 2 totally different types of chemical constituents with antibacterial effects. That is just really going to increase the likelihood of successful treatment because you're hitting it from multiple angles. I try to aim for 2 to 3 sometimes if I can. So that's, but two's usually pretty good too. So Yarrow is also astringent like Goldenseal. So it'll help dry up local secretions, tighten up that mucous membrane, aid with the postnasal drip. It's also a bit decongestant. I think that's likely due to the bitterness and the aromatic property. The aromatics generally tend to kind of have a dispersive effect. But when it comes to an herbal neti pot, I don't want to use herbs that are super aromatic. The farthest I go, we'll cover with the next herb, or the next two have more aromatic properties, but you really don't want to do anything too spicy because it can just be a little uncomfortable when you're rinsing with it. I like Yarrow too because it's very inflammation modulating. So the volatile oil, interestingly, yields this blue, almost as deep blue as my shirt. Very nice deep blue color to the volatile oil. It contains the compounds azulene and cam-azulene, which are notably inflammation modulating. And of course, anywhere you've got infection, you're going to have inflammation present, which is good. You want that inflammation to be there, but it might be contributing to some uncomfortable symptoms. So modulating that inflammation can be helpful a little bit. Yarrow is cool and dry, so that's nice there. The other thing that I like about Yarrow here too is that and this is an important point also with Goldenseal actually, is that the astringency is generally a really good action for sore throat. So when folks got the swollen tonsils, swollen adenoids, right, tonsillitis, strep throat, everything tends to get really right, like puffy, swollen, mouth breathy, clicky, swollen, hard to breathe. Everything's lymph and it's just all right there, right? That's a really, really medical technical term there. Oh, that one, that's how it feels. So anyways, nerd alert. So the astringents is what I was talking about. Very good there in the throat. Dries excessive secretions, tightens up the tonsils, the adenoids, eases the pain oftentimes. Tannins typically have inflammation modulating effects too. So it just helps with the sore throat. So if you've got the sinusitis, postnasal drip, sore throat, and you're maybe making, a Goldenseal and Yarrow together as a tea, for example, for your neti, maybe set a little bit aside and drink it, and it'll help with the sore throat. The other thing I like about that with the Yarrow is that it's diaphoretic. So if there's an accompanying fever, Yarrows can be really helpful to address the fever side of that. This is, of course, one of our classic fever remedies from the European materia medica. Yarrow's been used as a fever medicine for a very, very long time, and it works very, very well. So I mentioned Yarrow here because it does a lot of different things. Everybody should have Yarrow around, but you can use it not just locally, topically for the sinus thing, but you could drink a little bit of it too. And if you got a fever, it'll be helpful there as well. Real quick announcement here to interrupt our discussion on my top 5 favorite herbs for sinus infection, because I want to make sure that you know about what is happening 2 weeks from now. The Vitalist Herbalism mini course is opening up, and this is your opportunity to get a 100% free workshop series here from the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. In this 3-part series, I'm going to be going in depth on how you can break free from the trappings of an allopathic approach to working with plants, to understanding people, to move into a more traditional approach to working with plants by understanding the constitutional patterns within the people you work with, the energetic dynamics of the plants that you use, and ultimately a holistic approach that helps you be an effective herbal practitioner. So 2 weeks from now, on September 22nd, we're going to be opening up enrollment for our free Vitalist Herbalism mini course. So be sure to get on the waiting list, link in the description below. And I look forward to seeing you there, answering your comments and questions there in the workshops. And it's happening starting 9/22 for 1 week only. So be sure to check it out while you can. And with that, let's get back to talking about my 5 top favorite herbs for addressing a sinus infection. Next herb is sage. This good old garden sage, Salvia officinalis. Now, this is another really great remedy for the sinuses. I like sage here for a number of different reasons. Sage is one of those unique plants because it's an aromatic astringent, and there's not a ton of aromatic astringents. Obviously, it's in the mint family, so you're getting that aromatic property of the mints. But unlike most mints, most mints aren't astringent, okay? This is one of the things that makes sage particularly notable, I would say, amongst the mints, and very, very useful. So it's, instead of, Yarrow and Goldenseal, both bitter. Yarrow is bitter and aromatic. Both are a bit astringent. With sage, we're in aromatic territory now. So this is not a bitter herb. This is an aromatic, drying, astringent herb. If you ever put a sage leaf in your mouth, you can feel the astringency. It tightens, it puckers, but it also has that nice, really pleasant, flavorful, aromatic nature that, you want to put on a roast chicken. So sage is very good here. Like the other 2 herbs, displays antibacterial effects, also displays some antifungal effects. So I consider sage critical in those longer standing infections of the sinuses that you might consider. And it's doing so here through triterpenes. It also contains borneol and ursolic acid, all of which have, some degree of antimicrobial property. As noted, it's astringent, so very nice here to tighten and tonify the sinuses, dry up some of that moisture, deliver an antimicrobial effect. Sage is also, as I mentioned with the yarrow, this is one of our, in my opinion, key sore throat remedies. I think sage is really, really good for a sore throat. Anytime someone's got a sore throat, I'm thinking sage. I've actually helped quite a few people with sore throats just over the phone. Off a cuff, someone, a friend calls me, or maybe family member calls me, or, friend calls me on behalf of a sick kid or whatever. And I was like, oh, you got a sore throat. What do I do? And, maybe they can't go to the store. They don't have much herbs. It's like, okay, go to your kitchen. Do you have sage in your kitchen cupboard? Great. Do you have a lemon? Do you have some honey? That right there is very, very nice sore throat medicine. And if it's for the grown-ups, you could put a little splash of whiskey in there too and make it a little bit of a toddy, and that's kind of nice as well. It actually helps with the sore throat a little bit too. But if you don't want to put the booze in, you can just do the lemon, the honey, and a bit of sage tea. Very, very nice for a sore throat. That's a very nicely balanced, right? You get the sour with the lemon, the sweet with the honey, the pungent and astringent with the sage. The only taste not really there is bitter and salty, I suppose. I suppose you could put a little pinch of salt in there if you wanted to. And in fact, a little bit of salt probably would not be so bad of an idea if there's a lot of pain in there, because even just gargling salt water can actually be quite relieving to a sore throat. I'm mentioning this because a sore throat is not uncommon to accompany sinusitis. So, sage also has some expectorant properties. So, drinking a little bit of the tea can be nice because it'll help clear a bit of phlegm from the lungs. I would consider it more of a dry, pungent, stimulant expectorant. It's not, and I think it's good for the cough where it's like the sinuses are leaking and dripping down the throat, irritating the throat, causing coughing to happen there. That mucus might be going into the lungs and causing more phlegm in the lungs. Now, of course, One of the things that's very important to consider about just addressing respiratory tract infection in general is our goal is to push it up. So if it's in the lungs, we want the symptoms to come up. So if it's like way down here and then it's moving up here and then it's here and then it's here, that's proper progression, right? If it's here and then it goes here and then it goes here and then it goes here, it's like that infection is moving deeper into the body. That's not good. So we generally want like a good way to assess the progress of your therapeutics with regards to respiratory tract infections is that it should be moving up. So sage can be very good there if we're finding there's that postnasal drip, sinusitis, and a cough. Sage can be very good there as well. Sometimes when I'm doing netis, if the throat hurts, because oftentimes neti is just rinsing all the sinuses here. If you actually, it might sound a little uncomfortable, but if you might just like you're netting and breathe it in, and that'll kind of get some of that tea up, and that'll help wash out that area from the sinuses connecting down to the back of the throat. I think that's a really good idea. Or you could even just tilt back a little bit to try to get some of that neti to wash down the sinuses down to the back of the throat. This way you're making sure that you're coating all of those mucosal membranes with this, again, cooling, drying, antimicrobial, astringing wash to just make sure you're getting all the tissues coming into contact with that. Sage, interestingly, actually is also diaphoretic. It's strange because it's diaphoretic. It can make you sweat a little bit, but it's also anti-diaphoretic. This is an herb commonly used it can address things like menopausal hot flashes. It can be used for people that constantly are just sweating all the time, like they're excessively sweating. Sage can kind of, in a way, astringe the pores is one way I think of it. So it's weird. It's diaphoretic, but it's also oddly anti-diaphoretic. Not a lot of herbs are like that. It's also inflammation modulating, as pretty much most of these herbs are. Cool and dry, and it's energetics. Though some consider sage warm and dry. Some consider it cool and dry. Okay, next herb. A little bit of a fringy herb. May not have heard of this one, but very, very good herb. A little bit harder to come by, might be a little more expensive, but very, very good herb. This is Yerba mansa, Anemopsis californicum. Yerba mansa I like to think of Yerba mansa as like the pungent version of Goldenseal in a way. It's instead of being really, really bitter, it's quite aromatic. So it's rich in volatile oils, and it's quite astringent. I think it's significantly more astringent than sage. I think it's significantly more pungent than sage. Personally, I think it's a stronger remedy than sage. So if I had to choose between sage and Yerba mansa for a treatment of a sinus infection, I would pick Yerba mansa. But I mentioned the sage because it's easier to come by. Obviously, it's cheaper. But if you can acquire some Yerba mansa, it is a very, very, very strong herb, very powerful, very effective. And I really like it with Goldenseal. That was really the main base of the therapeutics that I was doing with my acute case of bacterial sinusitis was predominantly Goldenseal, Yerba mansa. There were some other herbs I was using in there, Yarrow being one. I didn't have any sage at the time, but Yarrow was definitely one. So antibacterial, antifungal, again, that's what we're going for on the antimicrobial side. This is due to volatile oils, terpenes and things like that. It's also astringent, so it's a very nice, again, tightening, binding, contracting astringent. It's very pungent, very aromatic. It's very opening. So where I like the pungence here is if you get that really congested, like you can't even breathe through your nose at all. This is where I like the aromatics. So, because the bitters can help by draining some fluids and tightening and astringing and getting the bogginess down. But the aromatics are really nice because they just penetrate. They move up, they move out, they disperse stagnation, they penetrate through and just kind of open everything up so that hopefully you can finally get a breath through your nose. There's nothing more frustrating than the like constantly having to mouth breathe because you literally can't get a single little even peephole of breath through your nose, right? So yeah, the Yerba mansa is warm, it's dry, it's tonic astringent, very, very good remedy. I definitely think the combination of Goldenseal Yerba mansa is pretty strong. Might be a little expensive, but boy, it'll be very effective, very, very effective. A milder version of that we could think of as being maybe yarrow and sage, or Oregon grape and sage if you wanted to stick with berberine containing plants. So that's Animopsis californicum. I believe that herb is a little bit ecologically at risk too. So if you are going to find Animopsis by cultivated, it's the same thing with things like American ginseng and Goldenseal. It's just best to try not to buy those wildcrafted because they are have been heavily over harvested. Last herb I wanted to mention here is Usnea lichen. Really, really good broad spectrum antimicrobial herb. Usnea is a pretty simple remedy. The way I understand it is it's just a really good, reliable antimicrobial, antifungal, antiviral, for the respiratory tract, for the digestive system, for the urinary tract, the systemic, topical, all of that. Usnea is a really good remedy to consider. And because Usnea is technically not a plant, it's a lichen. And so again, we've got some biochemical diversity happening here where it is not doing it through alkaloids or terpenes or triterpenes. It's doing it through lichenic acids, of which there are many, the primary one of which is usnic acid, which has a pretty nice broad spectrum antiseptic property. Now, Usnea is mildly astringent. I think compared to the other 4 remedies thus far discussed, it is probably the mildest of the astringents, but it does have a little bit of an astringency to it. It's a bit inflammation modulating. This is an herb that these days, I tend to include it in pretty much any formula where I'm treating an infection. I think it's really good. It's quite strong. It has to be prepared properly. So you have to heat the alcohol. Like it has to be extracted with hot alcohol. Otherwise it's not effective. It's not good medicine. So I do that in a sock slit. Excuse me. I do that in a sock slit extractor in my lab. And that tends to make, I find, very nice Usnea spagyric tincture, which is what I use. So yeah, Usnea is very, very good. I use it a lot for respiratory tract infection. I've also used it a lot for urinary tract infection, cystitis, things like that. Those are the 2 areas where I commonly use it, but I've used it myself for that bacterial sinusitis, and it worked pretty well. So how do we use these herbs? Well, I would say you would want to, there's the 2 options for the neti pot would be to prep a tea of the herbs. Now, some of these are roots in which you would want to decoct. Some of these are aerial parts of plants which you would want to infuse. So just make sure you differentiate those. And then I personally prefer really long steepings on tea. So I would just steep it for at least an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. At which point it should be a good warm temperature, not cold, but should be a decent warmth. Now, here's the thing. For neti, you got to filter that tea really good. And you don't want to be pouring a bunch of root particles up your nose. That's going to be really uncomfortable. So I would recommend filtering the tea through multiple layers of cheesecloth, or even better, a muslin bag. You just want to make sure that when you're looking at that tea, you don't see any floating particulate, anything in there. Same is true if you're doing like ever having to treat, blepharitis or conjunctivitis in the eyes. You want to make sure your tea that you're washing it with is super duper well filtered. Otherwise, you're putting particulates in your eye, and that doesn't feel good. Same thing for putting particulates up your nose. So filter it very well. And then typically you want to dissolve, a quarter to half teaspoon of salt per 8 ounces of neti preparation. Sometimes you can prepare enough tea. What I would do is prepare enough tea for the day of neti, and then just do 2 to 3 times a day of rinses. And you want to warm it up prior to pouring cold tea up your nose. Doesn't feel very nice. So bring it up to a nice lukewarm temperature. Now, the other method for neti would be to do tinctures. So this would be, again, good filtered, clean filtered water, boiled water if the water quality is questionable, but at least running it through, getting reverse osmosis water is great. Distilled water is great for this purpose. And then per neti pot, what I was doing was around 45 drops total of tinctures. Not 45 drops of each tincture, but 45 drops total. I want to be very clear that is 45 drops total drops, no more than 45 drops in the whole neti pot. Okay. So just making sure that's about 1.5 ml. I experimented with this a bit. I went up to 60 drops, about 2 mils. And that was like, this is a little bit uncomfortable. It wasn't horrible. I wasn't screaming in agony because it burned my sinuses, but it was like, yeah, that's not very comfortable. I wish I hadn't have done that. So I generally think, 45 drops is a good top level to go with your tinctures. That's what I was doing. I had a bunch of simples with me. So I think I was doing something like 15 drops Goldenseal, 15 drops Yerba mansa, 15 drops Usnea. There were some times where I was using Yarrow as well. I was just trying to rotate things around. So I was hitting it from multiple biochemical angles from anti-infectious perspective. So for addressing sinusitis, I think doing 3 of those netis a day, a morning, afternoon, evening kind of routine is good. If that middle one of the day is tough to do, doing morning and evening is better than nothing. In between, I think doing the insufflation is really good. So a saline solution that is sprayed up the sinuses with a sinus spray bottle. So typically to 2 ounces, what you could do is you could do a teaspoon of glycerin and then 2 ounces of water, and then, roughly 30 drops or so total of tincture in that 60 ml or 2 ounce bottle. Now you might think 30 drops in a whole 2 ml thing. Yeah. So that would be a recipe I learned from Paul Bergner, would be 15 drops of Yerba mansa, 15 drops Goldenseal each in there. Doesn't sound like much. It's enough. Don't do more glycerin. Too much glycerin will really burn. It's very uncomfortable. And then you fill that with saline solution. And boy, spraying that 2 pumps each nostril, sniff it up, breathe it in. Doing that multiple times a day. I was probably insufflating every 2 hours or so, multiple times a day, using that sinus spray. You want to, make sure that's well shaken, and that won't last forever. That's not a forever preserved form of medicine. So make sure it's not growing anything. If you leave it out on the counter months later and discover it, maybe don't spray that one up your nose. So those are my top 5 herbs and a couple recommendations for how to use them for addressing sinus infection. Hopefully you learned something new here in this video and enjoyed expanding your knowledge of materia medica. If you're watching this, maybe you or someone you know is struggling with a sinus infection. So I encourage you to try some of these things to treat it. It can be very, very helpful. It can help you avoid having to take antibiotics, which this did for me. I was prescribed a round of amoxicillin. I was said, no, thank you. I don't really want to do that. I'm going to do this instead and save those antibiotics for last possible, I don't want to do it if I don't have to, basically. And it worked. Typically for addressing a sinus infection, really acute or chronic, if you follow this, doing 2 to 3 neti rinses a day, doing some sinus insufflation, usually you'll see things start to clear up in a few days. If you don't, and of course, and during that time, it's good to, do your general immune stuff. And maybe take some echinacea, some elderberry, do some vitamin C, do some zinc. Your base, make sure you're resting, drinking enough water, taking baths, breathing in essential oils can be helpful, right? Just huffing eucalyptus is really good. Diffusing, making sure your mucous membranes don't get too dry. Steams in the shower, baths, diffusion, thieves oil, all that stuff's really good. But I think all of that without this, it's not going to work nearly as well. You got to get those herbs on the sinuses topically. So if you're watching this and are interested in learning more about that, be sure to check out my video on redefining topical application of herbs. You can also check out the more details I've got on the herbal neti pot. And a little bit more of my story of treating my sinusitis. So thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of The Plant Path. I do really appreciate your time and your attention and your commitment to your plant path. If you're watching or listening anywhere other than my website, be sure to head over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, where we've got tons of free content over there, free workshops, more in-depth training series. Get on our newsletter so you can get all the updates about special enrollment periods where we discount our products and programs and membership site, all sorts of really great stuff. If you are watching or listening on YouTube, Spotify, podcast, wherever you might be, hit that like button, subscribe. It really does help the channel. Thank you. First of all, thank you to all of you, right? Thank you to all of you for subscribing to the channel, especially over there on YouTube. I've been seeing things really starting to grow on YouTube more. So thank you all very much. I feel like we're approaching a big milestone. So I'm hoping to reach that 100,000 mark on YouTube. That'll be a really huge day for me. So thank you all very much for that. Wherever you're watching, listening, thank you. I really appreciate it. And it really does help support the channel so I can continue to produce and publish as quality free herbal education as I can here for the herbal community. So thank you very much. And until the next one, take care and be well.